Politics and Prison Inc. in Arizona, a map for navigation in a world of post-structural violence by Enrique Alan Olivares-Pelayo, was published in the fall 2023 edition of the Journal of the Southwest. In this episode, the author of the piece discusses his work on embodied carceral geographies, how the punishment of the prison system manifests in and on the bodies of those it ensnares. And that's a lot of people. 1 in 5 prisoners in the world is incarcerated in the United States. Tens of thousands of those people are in Arizona. The state spends over $1 billion of our general budget on the correctional system. It's the third highest cost, 8%. Enrique was confined in that system for almost 5 years. In his work, he situates prison, the constellation of institutions that create the penal complexes at every level of government, including those which detain people on behalf of national immigration and customs enforcement, as a landscape of structural violence. His piece in the journal looks at the tattoos that many acquire during their time locked up, as visible representations of their experiences. He's made and is working on other contributions to a currently pretty limited body of academic literature. He's examining the politics of security threat groups, or prison gangs, and the process of arbitrage within the system. We had a really interesting and candid conversation. It's presented here with minimal interludes from me, stitched together and edited a bit for relevance and continuity.
My name is Enrique Alan Olivares-Pelayo. I'm a third-year doctoral student in the Department of Geography, Development, and Environment. My day job is as a community organizer for Just Communities Arizona. So primarily my work now is to launch community safety incubator projects, which is a term for essentially justice reinvestment. The recreational use of cannabis in Arizona is taxed. Part of that taxed money is earmarked for reinvestment into communities that experienced a disproportionate amount of harm due to the policing of illegal marijuana. So now that it's legally consumable by anyone over the age of 21, money is being reinvested into Black and brown communities that got policed really heavily. And part of that work is alongside neighbors who have a project that they want to see to completion, right? So I don't parachute in and tell people what to do or what would make them feel safer. They come to me in my capacity as an organizer with Just Communities Arizona, and they propose a project alongside a few of their neighbors. And so they are paid a stipend to see something through to completion, right? So whether that's the renovation of a playground structure or whether it's installing a little free library in a neighborhood that's never had one, whatever the case may be, we see that project through to completion. So the other hat I wear is statewide, and that is to organize and maintain the largest mechanism for outreach for expungement of cannabis charges in the state, right? So just getting people to sign up as expungement advocates and then do outreach and informational sessions for providers to make sure that folks who have a high likelihood of being impacted by old marijuana charges know that they can get free legal assistance through the Reclaim Your Future Coalition, reclaimyourfuture.org. So I split my time, fingers crossed that I split it effectively between being a doctoral student and working at an organization, nonprofit in Tucson, Arizona. So my background is actually in English and creative writing. I wanted to go to art school. I wanted to write an impactful, financially lucrative memoir about my time in prison. So I was a creative writing major and then enrolled in something called the Ronald E. McNair Achievement Program, which was a way to get underrepresented undergraduate students, Black and brown, Indigenous kids, into STEM and STEM adjacent social sciences. And so I was griping about my inability to find a Ronald E. McNair Achievement Program mentor to a friend in a completely unrelated context, like outside of like my 12-step home group meeting. And I'm like griping about my life to my friend who's also in 12-step and who's also like at the University of Arizona. And he's like, you should check out this dude named Stefano Block who just wrote this awesome book about graffiti and gangs in LA. So I hit this guy up who I didn't know based off the recommendation of a friend. And that when I met him, I like see this guy who looks exactly like me, like walking down the hall. And I was like, this could work. And so we hit it off, and I was writing in geography journals before I knew A, what geography was, B, before I was done with my undergrad. And so that sort of like set the path. Some of the theorizing that I'm doing on the somatic experience of carrying that trauma in your body. I mean, PTSD definitely would be the top line, right? In a nutshell. But the more I dig into the research in psychiatry and psychology around PTSD, like there's a lot of different kinds, and they have specific designations. And if post-combat stress is its own classification, then post-carceral stress should be too, because they're very similar in a lot of ways, but like those experiences are, if not universal, then generally applicable to people who have been incarcerated. And it's much more relatable and therapeutic to get help from somebody who knows what they're talking about and who's lived that too and who's in a different place than you. And so it's like, well, if he can do it, I can do it, right? I should say if they can do it, I can do it, because there's a lot of incarcerated women too. And it's like, what is it that happens to me when I'm doing like downward facing dog and I'm getting a deep hip opener and I feel like this wash of sadness and grief and just like this flood of memories from like doing some traumatizing stuff while I was incarcerated? Like, what is that? And so just like thinking through the somatic experiences of like what's held in my body as a somatic archive of incarceration, and then making that a data set. I feel like other feminist autoethnographic scholars have done the hard work for me of like justifying to the academy how that's not just humanistic memoir. I appreciate that a lot. But now I get to just like write as if it's taken for granted. All things being equal, I do a rigorous job of triangulating my memory against official documents that I can find, dates that I can like prove happened, places that I know I was, and because this memory thing, this somatic archive, one thing is a mental construction, a mental image of what happened, and that is a abstract third concept. It is neither what happened nor my memory of it. It is now an analysis of a memory of what happened. And so I am 3 degrees of separation at best from like a truth, a social scientific truth. But that is not the same as my somatic archive, which is a visceral, like nauseating. My body remembers much more clearly at the cellular level what it smelled like, what it sounded like, how I felt. And if I can get myself there, then my memories become, in my professional estimation, much more valid as a data set. And then there's also just like autoethnography as a pedagogical tool for other people who are currently incarcerated. Because like my stuff's 10 years out of date. And even though I talk to people who are getting released all the time, like my somatic archive is dusty compared to the ones that are like still currently incarcerated or just got out of the joint. And so teaching folks how to utilize the techniques of autoethnography and write well and engage with academia is important to me. And so just like learning more about autoethnography and learning how to make it so that people who have a similar experience to me can write their data points out. Like I get a ton of fulfillment from it. I think it's important. I look around and I would be happy to cede the position to someone else, but that person is not forthcoming. And so like when you look around and it's you, then it's you. I'm thinking of the economic, it's almost axiomatic, like how obvious it is. Like you take object A from zone A and you smuggle it where it is worth quadruple its value in zone B through a process called arbitrage. And then you get to charge whatever you want for object A, even though object A is like a common household appliance, right? Like a $20 cell phone from Walmart, a track phone. Like who cares, you know? Mm-hmm. In prison, it's worth $1,500. And so that process of crossing a line, a securitized line, and making something almost priceless is really interesting to me. And so I'm looking for like the kind of economic literature in geography that supports my rationale of like smuggling into prison is almost, it's like human nature. So even if the people who are incarcerated don't take it upon themselves, like how can you resist a $10,000 bonus untaxed for bringing in 5 phones as a cop? And then you add in like economic incentives, like the threat of violence or like crazy, scary stuff that happens to these folks, right? Because they're dealing with people who are like unrepentant gangsters. And so of course they're gonna like use any leverage point they can to get what they need. And so like bring in these phones or else. And so the phones get brought in, right? Along with a million other things. And so like, and then once they're in, like the dope is distributed in a super communist way, right? Like, yeah, one guy hit for all this dope and now he has 25 grams of heroin, but he shares it like super egalitarian, right? Amongst the folks who have earned their cut of what's going on. Like, and so the fascinating world of like contraband smuggling to me is an economic reality that like underlies the entire prison project, right? Because this is a multi-million-dollar business happening from within inside a multi-million-dollar public institution. People think that like private prisons is where the money is. That's such a like blip on the radar of how much these institutions cost. It's a $1 billion enterprise by the state of Arizona, and it can only expand. It cannot contract. So that to me is like follow the money, like it's not CCA logging people up on a federal contract on immigration beefs that are like less than 3 months. It is public prisons. It is state law. And that to me is where the money is. You know, behind like places you'd expect, right? Like California and Texas. We have one of the biggest prison systems in the country. And when I say biggest, I don't mean population-wise necessarily, because we don't have one of the most populous states, but we have one of the highest per capita rates of incarceration in the whole world.
Does that include detention?
Yes.
Okay.
Our state prison is, depending on whose data you're using, either 8th or 11th globally. Because the way it goes is like, it's the United States, and then it's a bunch of states within the United States as far as rates of incarceration. And then it's like some super incarcerating countries like China and Russia. It's like we are mass incarcerating to the point where individual American states are winning globally as to their rate of incarceration. And that's a dubious prize to claim. Well, I mean, Yuma Territorial Prison is like one of the cultural motifs of Arizona, right? Like you go and you take your picture behind the little bars and like, oh, what a cool memento, right? Like it predates the existence of the state as far as like what Arizona is about, right? It's about rough justice and posses and fighting robbers and handling indigenous incursions and violence. And like, it's just a rough and tumble justice system handed out at the end of a gun. The mythology of that hasn't changed very much at all as far as the ethos of justice in the state. And it's had an extremely high rate of incarceration and racialized incarceration for 85 years. And so when I say that like the prison is an indelible part of Arizona's culture, for many, many decades, Arizonan politicians took an immense amount of pride in the draconian punishment system that was meted out here. We had Sheriff Joe Arpaio, who is either a villain or like a folk hero, depending on like how much you believe in humiliating people who break the law. And I don't take it for granted. A rate of incarceration is a political legislative mechanism. We have laws that make it so that a lot of things are really punitive in this state. Other states with lower rates of incarceration, it's not like their police force isn't out arresting people for the stuff that's arrestable. It's that they just see things as illegal in a different context. So we have like explicitly racialized laws that create explicitly racialized penal systems, that we have a indigenous population that is very high compared to most other states in the entire US. The rate of indigenous incarceration is also very high. So you have a large incarcerated indigenous population with a large incarcerated Chicano population with the largest population, which is incarcerated white people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. And also, even though there aren't very many Black people in the state, the rate of incarceration for them is sky high. So you have a very racially diverse penitentiary system, and you have a lot of politics within that system, like an explicit anti-Blackness, coalitions and factions and gang interactions in a system that is overcrowded, understaffed, decaying from the inside, and like very segregated racially, and like, I don't want to use the word corruption loosely, but just like the tail's wagging the dog, right? Like administration is fighting an uphill battle to just maintain some semblance of like security and control in a system that is run top to bottom by gang chieftains. When I say run top to bottom, I mean like administration can't do anything without buy-in from gang leaders. They can't impose anything without buy-in from gang leaders. It's a unique environment with paradoxical and mutually exclusive relationship building happening all the time. Administration is in an antagonistic and simultaneously cooperative relationship to leaders of gangs that are explicitly anti-administration and also willing to cooperate if it's to their benefit. So it's like, are you a snitch or a rat if you sit down with a warden and hammer out, you know, some operating procedure on how this is going to go? No. Like, are you a snitch or a rat if you do a debrief, renounce gang ties, get onto a yard as a ex-gang member, and then continue to run your gang? No, you're playing the game. Everyone is playing the game. Mm-hmm. It's three-card Monte all the time. You got to keep your eye on the ball, and the rules change. But like the number one rule is you play to win. And so like rules are there to sometimes be enforced, sometimes not be enforced, and sometimes it feels so arbitrary on what day is what. But the way that the cookie crumbles is security threat groups have a seat at the table as far as what prison looks like, period. They maintain a power base so that they can remain financially solvent. That's what they're there for. Like, their main purpose is to get rich. And they have a ton of ethnic and racial rationale for their existence. A lot of pride. I'm not saying that stuff's fake, but that stuff serves their purpose, which is to make money legally and extra legally while incarcerated. So, structural violence, as in the social mechanisms and the apparatus that we have to monopolize violence as a form of state control, right? Like structurally, there's a police force, there's laws, and that structure has a legal monopoly on who lives and who dies. If anyone else does it, it's a homicide. If the actors in that structure do it, it's officer-involved shooting or whatever, or illegal execution or whatever. But they have a monopoly on life and death. So that's the structure of violence. Post-structural violence doesn't mean after that, or like beyond that. It means like what happens when you engage with that system. The prison system as a site of post-structural violence means like you have been engaged by the structural violence of the state of Arizona. Now what? You are in a post-structural violent landscape. So you must now reckon with the consequences of your engagement of this structure. And so you either capitulate and become what you're being told you are, essentially, by the state, or you rebel and become what you're being told you are by these systems of like resistance within the prison system, the political gangs that exist in resistance to administration policies, right? Like you either abide by this landscape where the rules of violence and the rules of what's right are uniquely warped, or you just like try and keep your eyes down and make your time as peaceful as possible, which is possible to like different extents depending on how much you get involved in the things that like immediately suck you into a different way of doing things. And like I saw people who had had a really long time under their belt navigating that landscape of post-structural violence successfully by their definition, keeping their nose clean, minding their business, getting their boots on when it was time to riot, but like not engaging with either gangs or administration. But I was very young and very addicted to drugs and just rambunctious and failed spectacularly at avoiding the attention of administration and the attention of people who were calling shots for their gang. Anyone under 25 is classified at a much higher internal assessment risk score than over 25 because the system knows that your brain hasn't finished developing. They know that you are much less likely to stop yourself from an impulsive decision or from a violent act or from using drugs. So yeah, I definitely met that expectation. You're dropped into an environment where it's sort of taken for granted that this is the way things are. Lower levels of security, I've written about this, are like way more Mickey Mouse, and like there's not really the incentive for anyone to take that stuff too seriously, right? Most people there are doing less than 5 years. They've been promised a job or a reason for not messing up their time and doing it super hardcore, right? But the higher security levels totally suck. And that's where the reality of racialization and gang existence really like becomes self-evident. And in those higher levels of security, racialization is not a gimmick. It is like a survival mechanism, but it's not survival from against other races. It's survival from your own race, right? Because like the people who call the shots are not going to let go of their power base, and their power base is based explicitly on every new person buying into the schema of like there being a prison gang that's in control. And so like that perpetuates itself. And I think that that's really like the bait and switch of being racialized in the penitentiary. The people who are gonna come and jack you up aren't from a different race. They're your race if you don't play according to your race's rules.
For the rest of this audio, we're talking about Enrique's piece in the journal. The themes it touches on include his conception of the Southwest, racialization within the culture of its prisons, and how that's represented in prison tattoos, a visible somatic archive. In it, he describes how not all experiences of prison are the same. The yard you're put into can set the parameters for your life behind bars.
There's no such thing as a 1, so 2's a minimum. A lot of the people there have a C clearance to leave the gate with staff. And you see them on the freeway, and you see them picking up office buildings, and you see them doing all kinds of stuff all over the place. They're in Orange, and they live in a prison, but they are well paid as far as prisons go. Like sometimes even like $80 or $1.50 an hour. 80 cents, by the way. And it's like just not a very highly secure facility. Like what I mean is you can do free movement all the time. And 3 yards are medium security. They used to be controlled movement, which means that like you had to wait for chow in a line and move to chow supervised by police. You had to wait for recreation. But now 3 yards are open. So open 3 yards are medium security. The people on them could be doing a long amount of time. They could be there for violent charges, but they look like 2 yards in the unrestricted movement, but they don't feel like 2 yards. They're a much more political place. They are often the most violent yard because it's everyone who should be in close or maximum security given free license to be wherever they want until the gates lock at night. So it's a bunch of like people, a mix, a free-for-all grab bag of like what you're there for or why you're there. I don't mean charges wise. I mean like how you got to be on a medium custody yard. Maybe you're coming up from a 2 yard because you're a knucklehead. Or maybe you're coming down from a super high yard for good behavior. And close security, a 4 yard is restricted movement. Most of the time you're in your cell. But the units do leave their cell, single file, to go eat communally. And they leave their housing single file to go get locked together inside of a rec yard. And that's really the time of most danger, right? Is when all the doors pop and you're free to mill around for 5 or 10 minutes while the cops get their stuff together and take you guys out to chow. But most of the time you're locked up. And then a 5 yard, back when I was doing time, there was one controlled movement 5 yard out in Central Unit. It's famous. It's like what you imagine a prison to look like actual prison bars, as opposed to like a fully steel door. Central Unit, you like went to chow and went to rec and stuff, and that was a maximum security. But for the most part, 5 yards are special management units where they lock you up and throw away the key. Every other day, you get to go play in a rec pen with a little blue rubber ball. Your access to showers is very limited. For the most part, I just showered using my sink. And yeah, that is Supermax. But it's not called Supermax. It's called Special Management. So like you break a CD player, you take the motor from it, and you jury rig it to a gun made out of a pen tube and a wire. The wire can be made from the coiled spring of a bottle, like a spray bottle, or a guitar string, or something along that like that. And so if you have a coiled wire, then you'll have to heat it and straighten it out and sort of beat it straight, like smelting or blacksmithing or something. And so now you have a needle, you have a tube, you have a motor, and you got to do some apprentice electrician stuff so that your motor can be plugged into the wall. And then you have a gun. Once you have a gun, you need ink. So you're going to spend all day long burning conditioner with a wick. You make a candle out of you can use hair gel or cocoa butter or Tresemme conditioner, you're going to burn it all day long, and that soot you're going to mix with a little bit of water, and now you have ink. And so you have ink, you have a tattoo gun, and then you need a friend to look out for you while someone else tattoos you. And you just like lay down on your rack, and someone comes over and draws on you. Most of the art that I saw was freehand, very little stenciling involved, but there is stenciling. So you use like fly paper from the kitchen, and you draw on it with a marker, and then you use like deodorant to like get the stencil image onto the body. And it's a contraband activity. On lower security yards, it's a bigger deal because the cops have less to do. On higher security yards, it's like, thank God they're just tattooing themselves today. No one's gonna bother them when it could create an altercation that's like way worse. There's not going to be an artist willing to draw certain things on you, period. Like, no white guy, tattoo artist in prison is going to draw Nazi regalia on you. No Stormwaffen bolts, no like War Eagle, because that stuff is like intellectual property of a prison gang. So like they're just not gonna get political like that for you, because the consequences are for everybody, right? But they don't have to be clicked up to tattoo gang tattoos onto a gang member. You don't have to get a gang tattoo drawn on you by someone of equal rank in your gang. Now, the likelihood is that the higher you are in a gang, the more that is going to happen, because like the only people you're locked up with are other gang members of equal power with you, right? And so like it's just the two of you in a cell for the next 20 years. So like who else is going to draw your tattoo? But like on open yards, artists have a lot of respect, right? Because they are like in this liminal space between knowing everyone in their race and being like respected as an artist. Like if you can draw really, really well, you're like flush, you know? People are gonna take care of you. They're a stark reminder that like that stuff really happened. And like even the stuff that I thought was important back then, or like the one of the mottos that like I used to live by is happiness is overrated. I have that saying tattooed on myself, along with like a sad clown with his mouth stitched up, because there were things that were more important to me than my own happiness at that time, right? Like survival is more important. I mean, honestly, there's a ton of things more important than happiness. So happiness is overrated when you're confronting the reality of like a post-structurally violent landscape. It's like, oh my God, my own honor is more important to me than my happiness. The safety of the people that I'm using with and like doing dirt with is more important to me than my own happiness. My reputation is way more important to me than my own happiness. Like I'm willing to get actually super miserable, in fact, in defense of all those things. So when I think about something that I have tattooed on me, like my last name over my shoulders, it's like, right? Like everyone else has their last name tattooed. Like you see Chavez and Gomez and like everyone's got their last name on their shoulders. So like I do too. It's an obvious flag that you were in the joint, you know, like so that when you take your shirt off, if something pops off, like you can see who's around you. Big, labeled. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a way of like reclaiming identity and agency. And so the tattoos are definitely a way of like owning a sense of like, yeah, we're in here, but like it's our world, right? The cops respect and fear us, not the other way around. Like, I don't know how else to describe it. And so like that's addictive, and that's like a power, a relationship to power that I think when you don't have anything else, like it's really, really difficult to want to give that up. It's an identity construct that is powerful. And you're only powerful within the strictly delineated bounds of your world. But like when you're getting paroled to a homeless shelter, like why would you want to leave? And so like I have a catalog in my mind of like classic penitentiary tattoos. And like once I go through this list, maybe you'll start to spot them too, right? Like cell structure, like skin melting, skulls appearing out of smoke, dollar bill signs, fedora wearing Chicano clowns, Aztec iconography, white supremacist iconography, feathers and war shields on indigenous, formerly incarcerated people or currently incarcerated people. And so like I was at a yoga class and I'm doing downward facing dog, and out of the corner of my eye I see this like huge white boy, and he's got like foreshore black and gray cell structure on his like upper right arm, like by his deltoid. And I'm just like, okay. He also has a bunch, like me, of like super vibrant, colorful, obviously street tattoos, right? And like maybe, not sure, his reasons are the same as mine. I'm already covered in tattoos, so I might as well like get tattoos that distract and pull the eye away from like the dull gray tattoos on my upper body, right? So I'm looking at this guy, and then I go and I sit by my teacher after class, and that guy comes up straight up to the teacher and is like, thank you so much for class. And I'm like, that is a very like incarcerated way of acknowledging and respecting the offering that you just took part of, right? Like, I don't know, incarcerated dudes are way more polite than is what is taken for granted on the street. Yeah. Like, no one's more polite than a man who's incarcerated. I don't know. Like, we're just not disrespectful to each other. Because like the threat of violence is so, it's on the surface. It's an explicit, overt threat of violence, so everyone is very respectful. So this dude comes straight over and is super polite, and then he looks at me and he's like, wow, you getting swole in yoga? You getting buff in yoga? And I look at him and I'm just like, I got swole the same place you did, bro. And then he's like, and then I saw him touch his upper right arm and go, oh, right on. And I was just like, I still got it. I've still got it. Yeah, I mean, we're out here to the tune of like 600,000 people a year. There's definitely like a fear of being pigeonholed as somebody who's professionally, formally incarcerated. Like that's the gig I'm in, but that's also the expertise I have. And that's the experience that I can use as a leverage point to start educating people about places that are really, really difficult to access, and emotional places that are like bleak and traumatizing, and I think need their own special kind of engagement in order to like bring people from one place to another when they get out. It's like, oh, the rate of recidivism. And it's like, yeah, because people need more than even housing, and they need more than even food stamps. Like they need deep therapy, and they need like time. I mean, real quick, I want to talk about like opening up a space in the literature for the experiences of formerly incarcerated people in a space that I think has predominantly heard theorizations and observations from folks who have like an explicitly ideological bent. Now, I'm not anti-abolitionist. My mortgage is paid by an abolitionist organization. And what I mean by that is like an organization that is dedicated to community safety outside of the punishment system, outside of policing, outside of prisons. But I think that it is a huge leap to ask somebody whose reality has been prisons and who has just gotten out of the joint to care at all about a community garden or about solar lighting so that kids can play in the wash later at night. It's like, what? Like it's almost absurd on its face to ask somebody who has the experiences I have to care about that right away. And so I want to bridge the gap between explicitly carceral geographies and abolitionist geographies, because I think the abolitionist geographies are light years ahead in theory than in what they can produce in praxis. Utopian futurities and like all this rad work coming out of abolition, I think it's kind of putting the cart before the horse. But it's like, what are we abolishing again? Prisons? Then talk more about prisons. And it doesn't matter how much we write about like abolitionist futurities and possibilities, if we're not engaging with incarcerated people as like valid co-authors and writers of their own autoethnographic research. And so that's kind of like where I'm at with like wanting to engage with this stuff, because like I do both things, right? Like I'm an abolitionist in the sense that one day I feel in my heart we will look at the experiment of mass incarceration the same way that we look at the aberration of enslavement. And we're going to be like, wow, it was inhumane. And so my abolition work is super small scale, super humble, not going to change the world, probably barely going to change the neighborhood, but we got to start somewhere. But it's not accessible to somebody who needs to write through their carceral experience. And those things right now feel like different academic niches. And I'm trying to bridge the gap and bring them closer together and bring them into closer relationship to one another. I don't think it's hard for me to justify myself to the Academy based on the reception I've had this far, right? Like I'm constantly super encouraged by the fact that like I get to write. Like I get to see my stuff out there in the conversation in journals. The first piece I ever wrote was an Antipode. They can find that on Antipode, and it's about like racialization in prison. And then we have a much more descriptive piece of research, just like broadcasting that the IHP, the Integrated Housing Program in Arizona, is it's a song and dance. It's like a bureaucratic cover-up. I have a piece in Geography Compass along with Dr. Stefano Block. We do an overview of carceral geographies from the 9 perspectives of Geography Compass. So like off the top of my head, it's like GIS, urban planning, economic, cultural. There's also a piece on the work that we're doing with the somatic archive and the somatic carceral like experience that we've had. That piece is in progress in Human Geography.
Again, if you haven't read the piece concerning tattoos in the Journal of the Southwest, it's in the autumn issue from 2023. We're deeply grateful to Enrique for sharing his insights here, as well as in the published version. Also, we want to hear from listeners about the types of stories and interviews you'd like to hear on Journal of the Southwest Radio. Please help us keep producing better content by taking the survey at the link in the show notes. And thanks, as always, for listening.